Welcome back to the Emotionally Healthy Woman. Today we're going to talk about quit blaming. This was originally presented in two parts, but I've combined it here today as one lesson. Does this look familiar? Have you ever played the blame game? Kids play it automatically. You ask them who did something, and they automatically point to someone else. In our house, we had the not me ghost. Our kids would say, not me, who did this? Not me. Well, when we moved, we told them the not me ghost didn't follow us from Colorado to Texas, so that there was no longer a not me ghost living with us. Yeah, it didn't work so much because it's automatic. We blame people. Unfortunately, this allows us to not take responsibility for our own actions. It allows us to look at others and just automatically, without thinking of the consequences, blame them. This is not okay. That's what we're going to talk about today. In her book, Geri Scazerro says, blaming comforts us, at least for a while, with the illusion that we are in control. If you think about that, when we are put on the spot and we are having to answer who is responsible for something, blaming someone else makes us feel, it gives us this illusion of being in control because I'm not taking responsibility for myself. I am allowing myself to stay out of it. That's not the godly way. That is not what we are supposed to do. That's not what the Bible tells us to do. We are not supposed to be blaming others. We need to take responsibility. But for that brief moment of time until reality comes crashing in, blaming gives us that peace of mind that we're in control and that we don't have to deal with consequences. Unfortunately, we have great examples in the Old Testament of blame shifting. It has been around since the beginning of time. Adam blamed Eve. Eve blamed the serpent. Sarah blamed Hagar. Brothers blamed Joseph. Israelites blamed Moses. Moses blamed God. And Saul blamed David. And there are so many more examples. This is not something new. This is something that's been going on since the beginning of time and seems to be an inherent characteristic trait. That doesn't mean that it's a good characteristic trait, something we need to watch all the time. So do we play the blame game today? Of course we do. We blame the elders. We blame our bosses and coworkers. We blame our parents, our spouses, our children. How about schools and teachers, government and leaders? We blame all of these and more, unfortunately, and it's crazy to think that we cannot take responsibility for ourselves, but we live in a day and age where responsibility is, very, very rarely taken for ourselves. We blame others all the time. It could never be my fault. My children are not doing well in school. Well, it's the teacher's fault. It's the school's fault. My job just is no fun at all. Well, that's obviously not my fault. That's my bosses and coworkers. Oh, something's wrong in the church. Well, the elders are not good leaders. Do you see the pattern here? There's no responsibility for anything that's happened. Is this how it should be? And as if blaming people wasn't enough, we blame the weather. We blame inflation, we blame traffic, we blame corporations, we blame Satan, cultures, ethnicities, and we blame God. Instead of taking responsibility, our entire society pushes that blame onto someone else. There's no concept or very little concept of the thought that I might have done something wrong or that I might be responsible for how the world is right now or any of it. We find someone, something to blame all the time. Does any of this sound familiar? You are ruining my life. Well, the church is not meeting my needs. My job doesn't pay enough, so I am in debt. I can't grow spiritually because the women of the church are immature. My boss makes life miserable. You know, whenever I visit my family, they stress me out. Look at each of those situations. A teenager says, "You're ruining my life." Now, is a parent truly trying to ruin their life? No. They're doing the best they can at training and teaching their children. When a child, or anyone for that matter, makes poor choices and they are called upon it, called on the carpet for it, well, it's not pleasant. Discipline is not pleasant. The Bible tells us discipline is not pleasant. And does it feel like your life is being ruined by someone else? Well, it can. But really, in essence, truly, who is to blame for that? It's not the parent who disobeyed. It's not the parent who made the poor choice. It's the parent who's trying to train a child. When the church is not meeting your needs, is that because you are not giving, so you're not getting? Is that because you are not there and investing your time and your sacrifice into it? Is it because you're not studying your Bible, you're not worshiping your God, you're not praying to your God as you should be? What is it about the church that is supposed to meet your needs? God meets your needs. But we're going to blame the church when we don't feel like we're getting out of it what we should. That's not okay. If I overspend my budget, is it my job's fault? Is it my boss's fault that I've overspent? My husband gets a bonus most of the time around Christmas time, and he has told the employees who work with him not to count on that bonus. That bonus is just exactly what it's called, a bonus. It is not a guarantee. It is not something you can budget on, because the boss may choose not to give it at some point. Well, unfortunately, over and over again, multiple times, there's an employee or two that have budgeted on that and have already spent it before the bonus is even given. So then when the bonus isn't given, then they're in debt and they're in shock and they're angry at their job. But it wasn't the boss who overspent. You see, we blame others even though it's our own actions that are causing the situation. I can't grow spiritually because the women of the church are immature. What are you doing to help them mature? Why is it their fault that you can't grow? They're not responsible for your salvation, for your spirituality. But unfortunately, it's easier to blame them and not be involved than to help fix the problem. My boss makes life miserable. Well, my job may be miserable. It's not, by the way. I love my job. But if my boss makes life miserable, what am I doing? My boss, my particular boss, loves to work with people. He is truly a people person, but he wants them to do their job. The people who work for him, if they do their job, he's happy, things are good, and you won't get any complaint from him. But if you are not doing your job, he can make life miserable. But it's not him truly who made the decision to not do their job. I did, or you did, not the boss. It is not the boss's fault that you chose not to do your job. And whenever I visit my family, they stress me out. Trust me, they do. They really do. But who is allowing that? Okay, my family, they're not setting out to stress me out. I'm allowing them to stress me out. I'm allowing them to take over my emotional state instead of keeping myself in check. That's not their fault. Do you see what I'm saying? We blame people so fast when really it is our own responsibility to make sure everything is where we need it to be. It is our own responsibility to accept the responsibility of things that happen in our life. The Dalai Lama said, "When you think everything is someone else's fault, you will suffer a lot. When you realize that everything springs only from yourself, you will learn both peace and joy." Now, I'm not taking God out of this. Understand. I agree with this quote that when you think everything is someone else's fault, you will suffer a lot. When you realize that everything springs only from yourself, meaning take responsibility for yourself, you will have peace and joy. There is a peace and joy in knowing that I am responsible. So I don't have to be slave to what happened when, by whom. My whole being can be more at peace. I can be happier because I'm not always grumbly blumbly about somebody else. I can take responsibility for me. One of the things my boss and I have talked about is the victim mentality, that when we don't take responsibility for ourselves, we create and cultivate a victim mentality. It makes us feel or makes us appear helpless, out of control. It gives us a sense of moral superiority because we've been through so much. There's a lack of responsibility because none of it is our fault. And it avoids discomfort for ourselves because we're not putting ourselves into the blame, into the responsibility. So therefore, we get to avoid consequences. The problem with this is that we all have trauma. We all have some sort of negative influence in our lives, throughout our lives. We could all be helpless. We could all be out of control. We could all have this sense of, I've been through so much more you could never understand. We could all say we have this lack of responsibility, not take responsibility, and enjoy the comfort in knowing we're not responsible for anything. Totally avoid pain and anguish. But what does that do for everybody else? And really, what that does for you is chain you to a victim mentality. Do you walk around with this victim mentality? Everybody else is the reason. Everybody else? That's not what we're supposed to do. Yes, I've had a lot happen in my life. Does that mean that I am more moral or superior to anyone else because my life has had a lot of negativity, a lot of trauma? No, that's not what that means. That I have the choice, and the example I use for this a lot is my childhood had a lot of abuse in it, of all kinds. And my sister, my half sister, also had some bad in it as well. We did not grow up together. I was in an adoptive situation and then in foster care. She was in with our biological mother, and she was molested a single time, not demeaning that. I was molested and abused in many, many, many ways for years. As we grew up, totally separate, had not met even until I was 18, we each made our choices. Her choice was to blame the system and the world for one bad incident. And even to this day, as she is almost 50, she still is blaming everyone else for that one incident. And it has affected her entire life in a negative way. At some point, I realized I wasn't going to let this life of abuse make me a negative, bad person, a person who chose. I realized it was my choice, which is saying quite a bit because in the situation I was in, I'm not sure how I got that, with the help of not only a group home, the counselors and people there, but also my husband as we met each other and studied the Bible and I became a Christian. These are the things that I figured out and learned through those. The biggest thing I learned was that it was my choice. I had a choice to either be the victim or be a survivor, and I chose to be a survivor. That's the point. To be a survivor, you have to take responsibility for for your part in things. You have to take responsibility and understand there are things you cannot control. But what I do with that is my choice. It's my choice to live in that agony, anguish, and victimization, or it's my choice to step away from it and say, you know what, that sucked, but I wouldn't be who I am today if it had not happened. I would not wish it on anyone, but I can't change it. So what good is it for me to say, oh, well, if it had never happened? Doesn't matter. It did happen. It's over and done. So now I choose to be who I am. You choose to either have this victim mentality by blaming others, or you choose to step out and take responsibility. Okay, so are you playing the blame game? Are you using blame? Do you feel you've been dealt a bad hand? Do you think you can't change anything for the better? Do you see your life as being out of your control? Do you rarely think you're wrong? Do you act as if apologizing is a sign of weakness? Do you dwell on the past instead of the future? Not that this means you're using blame completely, but it is a really good sign. These questions to ask yourself could show that you're using blame. Because all of these take the responsibility off yourself and put it on someone else. So I want you to take a moment and think about that. And I would challenge that everyone plays the blame game and uses blame at some point, if not always, at some point. So really think about that for a moment. In what ways are you using blame? Okay, so what are you going to do about it? Okay, so first let's look at where blame comes from. Blame is based in fear, and fear is based in Satan. So let's look at the fear of God versus the spirit of fear. There are 8 Hebrew words and 4 Greek words for fear. Okay, let's look at Psalm 111, verse 10. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. A good understanding have all those who do his commandments. His praise endures forever. Okay, so the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. That's something I want, right? I mean, this awe that we have for God, that's the fear of God, understanding that he is in control, understanding that he has the power, understanding that we are subject to him. That is the beginning of wisdom. Okay, look at 2 Timothy 1 verse 7. 2 Timothy 1 verse 7 says, "For God has not given us a spirit of timidity, but of power and love and discipline." Okay, so that spirit of timidity is also a spirit of fear. That word can be used for both. God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and love and discipline. So where has the spirit of fear come from then? Because it's not from God. How about 1 John 4:18? 1 John 4:18 says, "There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear, because fear involves punishment, and one who fears is not perfected in love." So if we have this fear of God, this awe, that is what we're supposed to have. We respect and revere and cherish God and his capabilities and his strength and his power and his might. And that's the beginning of wisdom. God didn't give us the spirit of fear, so fear is from Satan. And perfect love casts out fear. So should we have the fear of God or the spirit of fear? Well, obviously we should have the fear of God. Blaming is based in the spirit of fear, which we are not supposed to have. So I've said multiple times, we need to take responsibility. You do have choices. No one's responsible for you in your life but you. In the movie The Wizard of Oz, all four of the characters, the Tin Man, Dorothy, the Scarecrow, the Cowardly Lion, they are all searching for something. Something is missing in their life. And they're trying to get that something. And they go through all of these trials, all of these crazy times together and alone, trying to find the one thing they think they need to fulfill them, right? Whether it be wanting to go home, wanting a heart, wanting a brain, wanting courage. They all had something they wanted and desired. But guess what? They had to make the journey. And in the end, they found that it was all inside them anyway. They all had what it took. They needed to take responsibility for themselves, for what they had, who they were. They needed to be responsible for that. That's where we are. We need to take responsibility for the fact that we have these things, we have these abilities. And when we try to blame others, when we blame others for our mistakes, for our failings, we are not taking responsibility. And then we wander around looking for what we're missing. And what we're missing is God and responsibility. What we're missing is following God's word and having the fear of God, not the spirit of fear. And then we decide out of that fear, the spirit of fear, we blame others instead of taking responsibility and being who God made us to be. We can be at peace. We can have great, wonderful joy, not being afraid all the time, taking responsibility for ourselves. So along with taking responsibility, we also need to set boundaries. Why are there fences around yards and properties? It's because we are trying to set our boundary, right? I have a fence around 3/4 of my yard to keep other people out, one, or to keep my grandchildren in, or to set the boundary of what's mine and what's my neighbor's. In ourselves, we need to establish boundaries as well, guided by God's word. He gives us those boundaries, and we need to follow them, and we need to respect the boundaries of others. It does no good when I say I have this boundary, but then when you have a boundary, I don't pay attention to it. That's a double standard, and that's not okay. We need to respect the boundaries of others as well, because we don't want to put them in a position to blame either. So, if my boundaries are established by God's word, my boundaries say that I am allowed this and not that, and you bring me that, I need to make sure that I don't allow that boundary to be crossed. Because if you cross that boundary, guess whose responsibility that is? Now, I could say, well, you brought it, and therefore you crossed my boundary. Well, although that would be true, who allowed you to cross that boundary? I did. I made the choice to allow you to cross that boundary and not be strong in my boundary. I don't like my granddaughters to have food on the living room furniture. And they were visiting, and the youngest one, sweet and precious as she is, got in my rocking chair, my armchair, with a banana. Now, I could have said, Ma'am doesn't allow food in the living room, on the living room furniture. Why don't you come back over here to the coffee table or to the kitchen or dining room table? But I didn't. So now I have banana smushed in my armchair. Whose fault is that? Okay, yes, my little 3-year-old granddaughter knows not to take food in my chair. But guess what? I saw her there and I didn't move her. I didn't remind her of that boundary. So whose fault is it I have smashed banana in my chair? Well, it's not my fault for allowing her to cross that boundary. And as silly as an illustration as that is, this is what we do all the time in greater with greater issues. I'm not going to drink. I'm not going to smoke. I'm not going to do drugs. I'm not going to whatever the issue you have is, I'm not going to do that. And yet we allow people to cross our boundary all the time when they come in our presence with these things. I don't allow foul language. I don't like it because if I hear it, I'm going to say it. And so I try to limit what I hear. And if I allow my daughter to come in my home and say these words, I'm going to say them, and I know this is an issue. So if she comes in my home and she says these words, and I don't say, whoa, 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 this is my boundary. You know this is my boundary. Don't say those words here, please, or do not come, because I don't want those words. If I don't stand up for my boundary, whose fault is it when I pop off and say a word that I shouldn't have said? Now I could say, well, my daughter was here and she said those words and I heard it. You know how it is. No, it's not her fault. The fault is mine for allowing her to cross my boundary. And that's not okay. That's where we have to get. We need to set our boundaries and then ensure our boundaries are respected, because if they're crossed, you've allowed it yourself and you are at fault for that. So we've taken responsibility, we've set boundaries, and now we have to speak up. You need to speak up on your own behalf, because guess what? As much as we like to think we can read other people's minds, we can't. Only God knows the hearts and souls of men. We don't. So we need to speak up on our own behalf. I can only articulate what I want and need. I cannot completely articulate what you want and need because I'm not you. But understand that speaking up for yourself doesn't mean that I'm degrading or that I'm against you because I'm speaking what I want. You know, if we go to a restaurant and my husband says, what pizza do you want? Okay. Well, he asked me what I want. What I want is a pizza that has a white sauce with meats and vegetables, except no peppers, no anchovies. I love that kind of the chicken and bacon and ooh, yummy. Okay. Does that mean that I'm against what he likes, which is hamburger and mushroom? No. If I like this pizza and he likes that pizza, saying I like this pizza does not degrade his pizza. Doesn't degrade his likes or wants or desires. It just means this is what I like. There's nothing that says you have to like the same thing. So just because I believe this doesn't mean you have to believe the same thing. Doesn't mean you have to like the same thing. But that doesn't also give us the right to be angry about it. One of my daughters used to try to get me to read a book or watch a movie that she really liked, various things, and by the actor who was in it or the reviews I saw, I knew I was not going to like it. It was not my type of movie or my type of book. And she would get so upset because I wasn't liking what she liked. And she felt like I was judging her based on the fact that I didn't want to watch that specific movie or read that specific book. Well, that's not what it is. That's not what I'm saying. Because I like something different doesn't mean that it's wrong for you to like something different. Okay? And that doesn't give me the right to be angry about it. It doesn't give you the right to be angry about it. It does not help either of us if we use anger or defensive tones to communicate this. I need to respect your boundaries as much as you need to respect mine. I need to speak up for myself as much as you need to speak up for you. You need to respect yourself and others enough to speak up for yourself boldly and honestly, but remember, with love. Yes and no are two very powerful words, but they're also very loving words. You know, saying yes to something is a wonderful agreement. Saying no to something is a disagreement. However, understand that because I say no, it doesn't mean I don't love you. It doesn't mean that I'm against you. It doesn't mean that I'm judging you. It means that is not for me. So saying no does not make me bad when saying yes would erode my integrity. Going to a location that is a bar, if I say no to that, if I'm invited to an event that is being held at a bar, and I don't want to go in a bar, saying no doesn't make me a bad person, okay? Because if I say yes and go, it's eroding my own integrity. And I can't be true to myself if I'm going and doing things that I don't agree with. And unfortunately, we allow ourselves to get pushed into, pulled into, talked into these various ways of going against our own integrity, and then we blame them for it, and it was our own choice. We chose, for whatever reason, to give in to that and not stand up for ourselves. So say yes, say no. Don't allow yourself to be enslaved by guilt by saying no either. Just because I said no to an event held in a bar that I shouldn't and wouldn't want to go to anyway, that shouldn't make me feel guilty. Okay? We allow ourselves to feel guilty over far too many things, myself included. We allow guilt to erode us because I don't want to feel guilty for saying no when that might hurt your feelings. I don't want the guilt of saying yes to something I don't want to do. You see this tug of war that we have. There's guilt everywhere, okay? Satan has it all over. Guilt is a huge weapon. We need to stop. We need to stop feeling guilty because we don't want to do something. We don't want to say something. We don't want to be a part of something. Or vice versa, that we do want to be a part of something. We do want to do something. Okay? Guilt has no place within this. You can't allow guilt to enslave you. Okay? You need to say yes or you need to say no. You need to say them lovingly. And remember that Christ said yes to some and no to others. He didn't say yes to everyone. He didn't heal everyone. He also didn't say no to everyone either. We need to remember that. Why do we allow ourselves to feel guilty for doing something that Christ did? Christ said no. He is our example. Why are we putting more upon ourselves than He has put on us? We need to be very careful with that. So say yes, say no. Use those words powerfully but lovingly. Don't allow your integrity to be eroded. So now we need to pay attention to our feelings. Again, we need to self-evaluate. I know I've said this multiple times throughout these lessons. That is very important because no one knows you like you. You need to self-evaluate. Acknowledge that you have feelings, both good and bad. Okay, feelings are not wrong. Remember, it's how you deal with them. Don't let them have the driver's seat. Don't put them in the trunk. Let them have their place as a guide and only a guide. Don't make your decisions solely emotionally, but allow your emotions to guide you, okay? So you need to pay attention to your feelings. You need to make sure that you are dealing with them appropriately, which means you take responsibility. I'm angry. This is why I'm angry, not you make me angry. This is why I'm angry. I am angry. You need to accept that you have feelings. Yes, there are good feelings. Yes, there are bad feelings. You need to make sure that that you are acknowledging them and taking responsibility for them. You know, when you go on an airplane, they tell you that should the oxygen masks fall because the cabin is losing pressure, you are to put your oxygen mask on before you help others. The reason for this is because you cannot take care of others if you don't take care of yourself. It will do a mother no good to try to help her child get an oxygen mask on when they don't have enough oxygen to breathe themselves, and at some point will pass out and the child is left without an oxygen mask anyway. So make sure you take care of yourself. You have to set aside time to do what you like to do, what makes you happy and contented, because this is your oxygen mask. When we get ourselves too busy, and I am one of those who do, when you get yourself too busy and you don't step aside to take time to do what you love to do, you slowly lose oxygen. You lose momentum. You lose the ability to help others because you are so depleted on your own. If I don't set aside time to play music or to cross stitch or to do a puzzle, if I don't set aside time to do those things, I can run into myself coming and going and feel like there's no way out of the craziness. Well, whose fault is that? I can blame the world. I can say, well, I'm managing an extra boss who is high maintenance. I could say I've taken on these extra teachings. I could say, well, we've got somebody living with us and there's extra responsibility there. There's all sorts of things I could say. But the end result truly is because I've allowed it. I've not taken care of myself. I've not made sure that my oxygen mask is on and in place before I've stepped out to help others. So although helping others is great, losing myself in the process is not. So what does it profit a man should he gain the whole world and lose his own soul? You have to take care of yourself physically, mentally, and spiritually before you can help others. Don't use that as an excuse, however, not to help others. Yes, you need to take care of yourself, but that doesn't mean only yourself. We are commanded to go. We are commanded to help. We are commanded to love. But we also need to take care of ourselves in that process. Don't allow yourself to get so depleted of oxygen that you can't help others. Okay, we also need to confront ourselves. Again, self-evaluation. You need to protect yourself from self-deception. Jeremiah 17:9 says, "The heart is more deceitful than all else and is desperately sick. Who can understand it?" We deceive ourselves. We allow ourselves to believe things that are not real, that are not true. We have to acknowledge that we have shortcomings and failures and disappointments. If you think you don't, you live in a fantasy world because every single human on this planet has shortcomings, has failures, and has disappointments. Accept that you do. Accept that that is part of life. But don't dwell on it. Don't allow yourself to become so embittered by it that you cannot function properly. You need to confront the fact that you're not perfect. You need to confront the fact that you do things in error. You say things in error, that you don't do what you're supposed to do. You don't read the Bible as often as you should. You don't pray like you should. You don't work for the Lord like you should. You're not as positive as you should be. You know what? We are all that way. The difference is we need to take responsibility for ourselves. We need to accept that we are not perfect. And then, you know what you need to do? You need to forgive yourself. And that's okay. We ask God to forgive us, and then we don't forgive ourselves. You have to confront the fact that you're not perfect. You have to confront the fact that you do have failings and disappointments and shortcomings. But then you have to forgive yourself and move on. You cannot sit on this page and say, "Ah, woe is me," for the rest of your life. You will not have a happy life. Okay? I can blame others till kingdom comes, but that doesn't help me, and it doesn't help you. And it's not living a life of responsibility and forgiveness. 1 John 1:9 says, if we confess our sins, he is faithful and righteous to forgive us our sins and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. If we say that we have not sinned, we make him a liar, and his word is not in us. We all have sinned. Every single one of us. All of us. But you know what? God loves us anyway. And he will forgive us. Why can't we forgive ourselves? It's time to let go of that. It's time to quit blaming others. It's time to take responsibility. And it's time to forgive ourselves for not being perfect. Because we're expecting something of ourselves that God does not expect of us. He knows we're not perfect. He knows even when we don't state our failings, he knows our failings. It's time to get real, ladies. We cannot continue to live a life of blame. Take responsibility, confront yourself, and forgive yourself. We also need to remain hopeful. You know, when you drive forward, but you're looking in the rearview mirror, how far are you going to get? You can't drive forward and continually look in the rearview mirror and expect not to hit something, not to get off track, or not to crash. That's what's going to happen. And if you are driving your life this way, if you're trying to move forward, but you're constantly looking back, that's what's going to happen. If you get stuck in the negative thinking, regrets, resentments, and blaming for all the past things that you've done, you are going to have a future wreck because you're not focusing where God tells you to focus. We're not to be focused on the past. We're not to say that's all there is. Because a bad past doesn't equal a bad future. There are plenty of people who've had horrible pasts and choose to step forward out of that. Don't get stuck in, well, this happened, that happened, they did this, I can't do this because they... It doesn't matter. Let it go. That past is past. Where I messed up and God could never forgive me. What? Seriously. Think about what you're saying when you say that. God tells you he can and will forgive you. All you have to do is ask. So why are we binding upon ourselves what Christ did not bind on us? Why are we saying that he can't forgive us when he clearly says he can and will? Let it go. Yes, we have all made mistakes. Yes, we have all messed up royally sometimes. And yet, there is hope. There is hope because our God is a conqueror. There is hope because our God is a forgiver. There is hope because he has put that within us. Look at Hebrews 12:1-3. Therefore, since we have so great a cloud of witnesses surrounding us, let us also lay aside every encumbrance and the sin which so easily entangles us, and let us run with endurance, the race that is set before us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. For consider him who has endured such hostility by sinners against himself, so that you may not grow weary and lose heart. Think of what Christ did for us. Now focus on that. Focus on him. Don't let the things that get you down, don't let the things that hinder us, the sin that so easily entangles us, don't let that destroy the future because you can't let it go. We all mess up. We all sin. We all fall short. But in verse 2, what did he say? Fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of faith. Look, he endured the cross for nothing he did. He endured the cross because I sinned. He endured the cross because I messed up. And you know what else he did? He rose. And we are forgiven. And we are new. And we remain hopeful because he did so much for us. We are not to lose heart. We are not to grow weary. We need to remain hopeful. So let's think carefully. I want you to think ahead. What are the consequences for you and for others if you blame? If I blame someone for something, what are the consequences of that? I know it seems like there wouldn't be, but the example I gave in class was a shirt that I had bought that my husband asked where I got this shirt, and I didn't want him to know I'd bought another thing that I'm not sure if I liked that, might have been a waste of money. And so I immediately said my daughter gave it to me. Yeah, well, it very well could have been something she would have given to me, something she would have liked. It was much more her style than mine, but that wasn't the case. The case was that I bought it, and I blamed her. Whoa, well, so what kind of consequences would come from that? Seems like a silly little lie, silly little blame. But guess what? So my daughter is married to a preacher. They don't make a ton of money. So now if my husband were to call her and say, you know what, I know you guys don't make a lot of money. Please don't buy clothes for your mom. We're fine. She doesn't, she can buy her own clothes. It was very kind. And my daughter says, I didn't buy mom clothes. Okay, so now her dad is upset. She spent money she didn't need to spend, especially if you talk to her husband and said, tell Cassie not to. Whoa, then she's in trouble with her husband, and she didn't even do anything. So think of the consequences for you and for others, because when you're blaming, you are blaming someone or something, correct? And it may seem like, well, if I blame the government for this, there's no consequence. Well, guess what? You are getting more and more of a negative thought to the government. Whomever you're talking to or blaming, sending this blame through, they're getting more negative connotations for the government. It's never fixed because you blame someone else, correct? Think about that. When you get yourself into that, I want you to think about the book of Proverbs. Go to the book of Proverbs. It is filled with wisdom. It's all about wisdom. And I love to read it because it's just so appropriate all the time. Yes, I know that it's generalization. It is called Proverbs for a reason, but it is filled with wisdom. Think about how the consequences of you blaming others goes against wisdom. Okay? That's not a wise thing to do. And we have a responsibility to think critically and respond wisely. Blaming is not responding wisely. So when you're faced with these situations, and they're situations you're not even thinking about because we do it so habitually and just automatically, when you think about that though, I want you to stop and think critically, think carefully, and respond wisely. Don't blame others. Be responsible. Now, going through all of this, making these changes, it's not easy. It can be scary, but you need to be courageous. Take responsibility for your own thoughts. Take responsibility for your own feelings. Take responsibility for your own actions. It's not easy, I know, but it is necessary if you want to have spiritual and emotional health. If you want to grow and be healthy in that growth, you need to do these things. You need to take responsibility. When we go through a fiery furnace, when something goes through a fiery furnace, all the impurities that they're leached out and the authenticity of the material is shown. Sometimes we have to go through the fiery furnace to be emotional, authentic, and spiritual. We cannot allow ourselves to continually play the blame game. It's not healthy. It's not spiritually healthy. It's not spiritually okay. I mean, it's not moral at all, if you think about that. So we need to get ourselves out of it. It's not easy, ladies. I know. I know it's not easy to step aside from everything you know and everything you do, everything you've been taught. But we must do it if we want spiritual and emotional health. Look at Joshua 1, verses 5 through 9. No man will be able to stand before you all the days of your life. Just as I have been with Moses, I will be with you. I will not fail you or forsake you. Be strong and courageous, for you shall give this people possession of the land which I swore to their fathers to give them. Only be strong and very courageous. Be careful to do according to all the law which Moses my servant commanded you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, so that you may have success wherever you go. This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do according to all that is written in it. For then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have success. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not tremble or be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. 3 times in 4 verses, God tells him, be strong and courageous. Do you think that is important? It is. It's repeated for a reason. It is important. We are to be strong and courageous. God was charging Joshua with these things that were not going to be easy. But he told him, be strong and courageous. The Lord your God is with you wherever you go. So remember that no matter what. Okay? Stop blaming and take responsibility for yourself, for your thoughts, your feelings, your actions. Take responsibility. And although that's going to be hard and sometimes it's going to suck, then the consequences are not going to be pleasant. For your emotional and spiritual health, it is imperative. So when you do this, be strong and courageous. Look to Joshua, where God tells him, be strong and courageous. He says, Joshua, it's not going to be easy. Be strong and courageous. I am with you. God is with you as you go through this journey. He's with you as you try to grow and strengthen your spirituality. When you try to grow and be emotionally healthy, He's with you. So be strong and courageous. Another quote from Geri Scazerro in her book, she says, when we quit blaming, we realize we are not responsible for other people's choices. They are. We cannot change them, but we can change ourselves with God's grace. There's a freedom in realizing I'm not responsible for you. You are not responsible for me. I am responsible for me. I can't change you. I can only change myself. God's grace is wonderful. It is absolutely wonderful. And as we struggle through this life, which has its ups and downs, hurts and anguishes and joys and mountaintops, God is there. And He forgives us our wrongs. And He loves us so very much. He wants us to be healthy. He wants us to be a follower of His. He wants us to love Him with everything that we have. He wants us to make a commitment to Him. He wants us to quit blaming others because you know what? It is our responsibility. We work out our salvation with fear and trembling between Him and us, not with other people. Our life, my husband cannot get me to heaven. That's my job. My job is to stay where I am supposed to be. Now, can we help each other? Yes. Can we make it there for each other? No. But I can't blame him. When I do things wrong, I cannot blame him. I have to take responsibility for my actions. I cannot change him. He cannot change me. But with God's grace, we can change ourselves. I want to be spiritually and emotionally healthy. I want to quit doing these things that are causing anguish and stress and turmoil in life. God's grace is amazing. And the freedom of not being responsible for others is wonderful. I know this has been a longer lesson than usual, as it was two combined, but I hope and pray that it has been a good lesson for you. It's obviously an emotional one for me, something that we do all the time, and we need to let it go. Please remember that blaming comes from fear, and fear comes from Satan. So when you blame for something, stop and think, why did I do that? Make amends, don't do it again. Pray for a heart that sees and understands and accepts and changes. A heart that wants to be healthy. A heart that wants to be following God to every degree possible. Next week we're going to talk about quit over-functioning. Yes, I will tell you I'm the pot and the kettle on this one. I over-function all the time. I'm working on it and my husband's trying to help me work on it. It's not an easy thing because that's me by nature. But there's so much more to life than over-functioning or under-functioning for that matter. I hope this has been a good lesson, and I look forward to chatting with you again. Have a good day.